This is Comrade Net from the Bundes movement of Jewish socialists against Israel, and of course, I'm Jason Unruhe. We decided that we were going to have a debate over an issue. I make the argument that the draft in America, we were saying specifically the currently existing capitalist America, is a good thing. However, Comrade Net feels that it would be a bad thing. So since we're cool with each other, we decided we're gonna have a debate over this. A quick one. It's not gonna be like a big, drama bullshit one that usually comes up like this. So do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Should I start with all my points or just my first point?
Uh, go one point at a time.
Okay. Well, if I had to guess, your position is because, people would come back and, I guess, body bags or stuff like they do with Vietnam, or like people would have the horrors of wars, exemplified because obviously people are in bucket loads of volunteering for the military, whereas people who wouldn't want to be there are being drafted against their will. But I think that because of how efficient the brainwashing system thing is, it would be more efficient than it'd be in Vietnam because they're way more fierce than they used to be, and they were fierce enough as they were back then. And to top it off, there's drones, so there'd be less casualties. That's the first reason why I think the draft would not have the results that it would have in the flower children era, basically.
I would agree to a large degree that that's true, but I think that the American public now would not want to fight the wars. Just to reiterate, my position is that there should be a draft in the United States because, from what we saw with the example of the Vietnam War, that once Americans were forced, the regular everyday Americans, not the career military people who are going to do what they're told no matter what, except for in a few extreme cases, are not willing to fight these wars. They won't do it. And if the military is made up of people with, their heart half in it, in the end, it will be doomed to failure. I mean, people really bought that garbage back in the day. Oh, we have to save Vietnam from the communists, and I mean, I'm sure they all pretty much believed that at the beginning. But then once the reality of war set into the American people, and it's them who had to die in their wars, all of a sudden they weren't so interested in doing it anymore. I mean, I think that's to be expected. I think that that's a natural reaction. I mean, people don't really want war, especially when, they're really not gonna get too much out of it. If it's just your government saying you have to go overseas, give up your life and do all this, BS, and for something that you don't even really want to do. So I would make the argument that people are less willing to fight today than they were back then. I think that the difference is that today a lot of right wingers, and I'll differentiate between conservatives and liberals. I think a lot of the conservatives who shoot their mouths off about going overseas and killing the brown people, and I'm sure there's probably a ton of them that's like that. I think a lot of them are chicken hawks. I think that they're just shooting off their mouths, and if they had to go, all of a sudden they wouldn't be, so ready to go anymore. I mean, there's that old liberal expression, when the Iraq War started and, liberals were opposed to it, and they said, well, if you think it's such a good war, and say, why don't you just sign up and go into the military? And of course, I'm sure a percentage of them did, but I think today, given the situation, I don't think they'll do it. I think they're full of it. And the liberals who oppose the wars anyway, well, I mean, obviously they're going to be terrible soldiers because they're already not down with it. So I think that there's that aspect to it, and I would also think that I think that even if this were capitalism or socialism, the will of the people should be expressed in that, and that if the American people are not willing to fight the war, then the war shouldn't happen. I think that's a democratic way of looking at it. If the people aren't willing to fight the war. If the heart of the public isn't into it, then should the state be doing the war anyway? That's what I would argue.
I gotta give it to you. That's a very good argument you have there. I would still disagree though, just simply because yes, it's true that the morale just isn't there, and you could say on one hand maybe it's less there than it was back then, but on the other hand you could also say that it's more here than it used to be, just simply because okay, on the matter of the liberals, which what does the liberals stand for anyway? I mean, they're not they're centrists, and there is the center will tip one way or another eventually anyway, and I'd say would probably go more to the right because you have to consider the Reagan administration really did change everything. That's not just something we say. That it did change things. Like you got the 1970s, for instance, which was probably the most conscious, not class conscious as much as culturally conscious. There was some class consciousness, mostly because of the Panthers and stuff like that. But you know, there was the war weariness. You know, you had people going over, for instance, you had Americans going over to Vietnam not because they were drafted, but because they were opposing their own military. Where is all that at the Middle East? And okay, yeah, there's no draft, I suppose, to encourage that behavior, but it's it's a different era than it used to be. I mean, Islamophobia really is largely unchallenged. Like, I would agree that those of LGBT have it difficult, but the most controversial thing I'd say is that it's even worse to be a Muslim. Being a Muslim, that I mean, you like the stuff that they say about the Muslims is exactly what they used to say about us right before World War II started, like to a T, to a T, the exact same talking points. Like if you know about certain newspaper sentiments that exist in the Weimar Republic, that's not that different than tuning into Fox News or listening to Glenn Beck on the issue of Muslims.
I would definitely agree with that. There is a very strong anti-Muslim sentiment, Islamophobic. I mean, we've seen like countless examples like that, like when they were building that Catholic church in Texas, and like, oh, it's a mosque, it's a mosque. No, it's a Catholic church because it had a domed roof. And mosques have domed roofs, but so do Catholic churches. So I mean, a side point, yeah, I definitely agree with you that that kind of racism is there. I think it comes down to a question of which, what are the priorities, and which tactic is going to work to achieve that. As a third world, as my first and primary contradiction is to stop the U.S. wars. And I feel that this would be a way to screw up those wars big time. I don't know if you have a different particular goal in mind with that position.
Well, we've had a lot of talks. Would you say, right? Like personal talks, private talks between you and me, you know, sort of.
Yeah.
So you know that although we wouldn't really classify it as third worldist, we definitely have a quasi third worldism of our own. There's a lot of things that, for instance, the LLCO puts out that we actually tend to agree with, and we don't go around talking about because let's just face it, you third worldists, nobody really gives you a fair chance to speak. Well, Finnish Bolshevik might be more fair to you, but like that's like one guy that's being fair. So we tend to upset people when that's mentioned. But like, let's take the first world, third world thing, and you'll understand this. In the first world, whatever preserves privilege is what the top priority is, particularly to an American, wouldn't you say? In fact, that's why the only welfare thing people give a crap about is what they don't have, and that's pretty much universal health care. They'll vote for something that will give them that, as opposed to demanding socialism. I mean, who demands socialism? Pretty much the first world lumpen proletariat, which is not as class conscious as it should be. Its revolutionary potential is held back by COINTELPRO, which is also why we advocate COINTELPRO awareness. There's a need to preserve privilege, and although, for instance, black people may not have white privilege, in certain places in the United States, they have just as much first world privilege as anyone else. I mean, maybe not in Louisiana where they've completely restored Jim Crow, but out here in Arizona, we have the most integrated poor. We also have a large fascist presence of police, but we have the most integrated poor. All right, people, you know how people talk about, and I'm talking about good people who don't trust the military. You know what the sentiment is about the military over here? Oh, well, they're just doing what they feel is their duty, and they're not understanding what they're saying. And yeah, maybe that would change if they got drafted, but I think that the brainwashing would get to them. You know what I mean? Including a black person, especially if he's not connected to black cultural struggle, which is not always as strong as it should. Because if it was, maybe there'd be some actual uprisings. But you know, and I know actual black revolutionaries, and that's one of their critiques is that they live amongst too many reactionaries. They even adopt the idea of resistance before revolution. So like there's a potential, not potential. There's a capacity, but there isn't the potential's not there. There's just capacity, and the first thing you have to do is raise consciousness. And people don't hear military and go, oh, that's right, slaughter, rape, and pillage, the worst kind, fascist on the ground in the Middle East. They don't connect that way. And there's so much fear mongering about who the Muslims are, and because of the fact that their society has made them bitter. You see a bitter person, you don't ask why he's bitter. A lot of Americans are very, I hate to say this, but I mean, it's not that I hate to say this, I'm afraid of what kind of backlash I'll get for saying this, but whatever, who cares? Americans think the world revolves around them, and deep down, they know that their interests are involved in war, keeping the empire alive, monopolization of the oil, not because we don't have enough oil in the United States, but because that monopoly will ensure that power. I mean, you know about what's being done in Venezuela, obviously. So I just don't think that it would shake them out of it if they were drafted. I think that they'd come back more worse because, yeah, okay, they're volunteers, but a lot of people come back from war, and it's not like Vietnam where they feel bad. They want to go out and kill more people. And I think average pacifistic people would be that way. And that's another thing. Americans are often pacifist. I'm not even nonviolent. I'm saying pacifist. And when pacifists are put into a military situation, they become the worst. Because a pacifist, I disagree with nonviolence, but I respect nonviolence. I'll put it that way. So a pacifist is practically soulless. You take that pacifist, you teach them how to fight, make them fight. You know, I don't know. I just don't see them coming back with the same kind of anger and regret that you got from Vietnam. Again, I'd go back to the drones, the fetishization of the military. I mean, you put enough fear, people believe it. I don't know. It's just, I just don't think that the draft would make people turn against the system. I think it might actually make, I mean, with all the executive orders, you know, that have passed that have never, you know, all the contingency plans that have never actually been activated, any dissent at home, I think, would get crushed. And I think real resistance is going to be dependent on not going to war.
I think this comes down to one primary question. Would being drafted push the American public into causing enough of a social unrest? I think that's the question. If no, then I would concede that you're right. If yes, I would concede. Oh, I would say that I'm right. Is there a way of objectively testing that?
If Canadians were drafted, I think Canadians may be angry. I think that people. I think when people think about Americans' shining moments, and they're rare moments. You had Justice Jackson, who was the only person who was against the internment camps, and thank God he is the guy that actually was involved in the Nuremberg trials. You have those shining examples. You had an uprising with the Black Panthers, but those are the exceptions, not the rule. It's like the USSR, for instance. The USSR did do terrible things, but those are the exception, not the rule. The USSR was a good country. It really was a good. And by the way, as a Bundist, we have real critiques we could make of the USSR, but they're not going to be the critiques you've heard. We're not going to say nonsense that Stalin killed all these people when he didn't, or that he was not the true successor of Lenin when actually, no, he did defend Lenin's line. We're going to mention, yeah, Lenin and Stalin thought we were Otis. We're going to mention things like that, and we disagree, although we would admit that Lenin's critique of the Bund was sound, especially with our way of that we used to do. We used to do the thing where we made alliances with the wrong people. All right, so with all that historical context, America, anything it did good was the exception. It's the opposite of like the literal opposite of the Soviet Union. Anything bad the Soviet Union did was the exception, not the rule. Anything good the United States does is the exception, not the rule. You know what I mean? Like the United States does lean more towards conquest. It's. I mean, have you heard the national the Star Spangled Banner? There's war in the song.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Like, have you ever heard a translation of the East Germany anthem? Quite the opposite. It's like hope for the future. It's beautiful. It's in German. If you don't speak German, obviously you need the subtitles, but it's beautiful. And that's the thing that's interesting. The United States is not a socialist country. It never was a socialist country. The closest people can remember is Eugene Debs running, and some would say I would say he was a socialist, but not very radical. Some would say he was more of a social democrat back when social democrats were still connected to socialism. That's not really relevant. That was the closest people saw. That was, you know what era that is. That's when we, in fact, according to Third Worldism, that was when the highest level of potential existed. All right, well, the closest we get to that is Sanders, and I like Sanders, but I won't stop people from voting for him, but I have some strong critiques to make of Sanders. The first being he's not a socialist at all. The second, that he probably still would fit into imperialism. Hell, he might curtail imperialism some ways, but to compensate, he'd probably pop it up somewhere else. And see, just look at the way we have things. We're not even where we are with I prefer to look at the 60s and 70s, but that's because of the Black Panther Party, and I think that is the way to go. But I know actual Panther groups and stuff, and I'm with them, and I'm sure they're going to make it, but they're only going to make it through resistance and through basically going unnoticed by the government until by the time they have their platforms, it's too late. A draft could screw up that whole thing. And I'm not talking about revolution. I'm talking about resistance that could lead to revolution. I'm talking about resistance in the First World where you have such a strong anti-imperialist consciousness that the morale in the United States will just dissipate. I'm afraid that a draft would undermine this process. I mean, a lot of it's compatible, by the way, with Third Worldism. A lot of it.
I think this is one of those things where, I think we both have valid points, and it would have to be settled by an experiment.
All right, where are we going to do this experiment?
I don't... Okay, I could go run for president and then institute a draft, and then we'll see who's right.
Jason Unruhe. Does Canada... I thought Canada had prime ministers.
No, I'll run for president of the U.S. and do it.
Okay, so I'll run for the... All right, cool. You'll be the Communist Party and I'll be the Socialist Party. All right.
Yeah, okay, I'll tell you what. We'll both run, and I'll run on a platform of drafting people, and you'll run on a platform of not drafting people, and we'll see who wins.
All right. Yeah, we'll do that. I mean, you do have interesting points. I give you that. There are... I'm not sure... Yeah, you're right, because I'm not sure who actually won this debate.
I honestly think it's one of those things where... you would need some kind of... I know it's like, oh yeah, well of course you guys are saying this because you're friends, but this would have to be tested some way. Like normally when you have these debates, it's like, well, yeah, clearly one side is wrong or the other, but we've both got very strong arguments for opposite positions that are valid.
Yeah, I'd be afraid to test it honestly, just for all the reasons I've mentioned.
I'm not American. Go ahead, do it.
Well, see, that's the thing. Unfortunately, I'm around Americans, and I don't know if you've picked up on this yet. After all the stuff that you get in your shout box, your comment section. But Americans are scary, and that's most of your audience, man. Americans are scary people, even the ones that say, I mean, dude, like, holy, I mean, Americans, like, I think the average American, their biggest aspiration at this point is to have a share in Netflix. I mean, that's sad.
Well, I mean, to the debate, I would add that if somebody wanted to like go to Canada to get away from the draft, I would be okay. Do that. That's fine. I would down with that. Just whatever would undermine the war effort itself, whether that be rebelling against the system and it falling the war and as a soldier be doing a shit job, or like completely avoiding the whole draft, like going underground or leaving the country, etc. Whatever. I think that's perfectly valid, because I think there's a difference between somebody who says I don't believe in the war and refuses to fight it, or someone who says yeah I believe in the war but then refuses to fight it. Like, you know what I mean? Like Bill Clinton back in the day dodged the draft in Vietnam, but back in those days he also opposed the war, so it would make sense. Whereas you have someone, like Donald Trump, who says, "Oh yeah, I believe in the war," but he dodged it like a bitch. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump is kind of I mean, the guy is. I mean, I understand that example, but Donald Trump is not the best example for anything. The only thing Donald Trump is a good example for is America in of itself.
Okay, Bush. George Bush Jr.
Okay, all right, that's a good example.
Like, yeah, I'm for the war, and then, like, basically never showed up for duty. I mean, let's face it, technically he didn't dodge the draft. He's still in there.
He did. It doesn't. He just did it through different means. He has a rich daddy who's connected to the Nazis, basically. I mean, so yeah, we can. I'll give you that. We will count that as a draft dodge.
Oh, Bill O'Reilly. Oh yeah, the war in Vietnam was right. We should have fought it. Oh, war starts. Oh yeah, my leg hurts. I got a problem with my leg. I can't fight. And then now he's like an avid jogger today.
You know what? That is not only a good example. That's like the best example, because Bill O'Reilly. I'm sure the listeners will know who Bill O'Reilly is. Bill O'Reilly is like, I can't believe that guy still has listeners. Honestly.
I mean, he got removed for being a misogynistic ass. I mean, I'm sure that's probably pretty prevalent among his viewers. But
yeah, but he still has a following, though. I mean, it's like Glenn Beck actually left Fox of his own will. Do you know that? He was not really fired. He actually left on his own.
I was like 99% certain he was fired for just being insane.
They would have fired him probably, but this is the thing about like the quasi libertarian or pseudo libertarian crowd. Or Republicans that pretend to be libertarians, and I'm not saying anything good about right-wing libertarians. I'm saying that it's such crap to begin with that it's a good thing for Republicans to co-opt. And on its own, it's crap. But I'm just saying it's certain types of edgy Republicans might want to co-opt it, like Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck built the Blaze afterwards. He's still big. He built the Blaze afterwards, and I think it's because Glenn Beck was saying a lot of stuff. He was trailblazing, not because he was doing anything great, but he was saying what a lot of, basically he was representing the Christian Zionists. That's really what he was doing, and that actually is the true base of a lot of the Republican Party at large.
Dude, he went on the 700 Club and said like, "Oh, we're living in the end times. This situation was brought about by this particular demon."
Yeah, I know. He said a lot of crazy stuff. He would say stuff that was pro-Israel while simultaneously being anti-Semitic. So in that way, I love Glenn Beck, because he makes my duty much easier, because I've been trying to explain that. Yeah, actually, if you really hate Jewish people, support the state of Israel. If you really hate us, support the state of Israel, because not only does the country not speak to us, its very existence is a violation. And Yes, we have a lot of heretics that are rabbis that say Israel's kosher, but they are in fact heretics, especially if they come from Chabad Lubavitch. But like, um, Glenn Beck. This is the thing about you got to know about Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck is a populist. Glenn Beck is a person who saw that Fox News has to fit into its own type of status quo. It may be shocking to know that even though the real strong base of the neoconservative platform is Christian Zionists are poor, typically people. They're people who are ignorant. They they basically watch TBN and CBN and stuff like that. They Daystar and all these other televangelist programs. They typically live in trailers or poor conditions. So you ever hear about the poor working class, the actual poor working class? Most most of those are the Christian Zionists, and they want to believe in miracles because their lives are so bad, and all they have is televangelism. And because they're so miserable, um, they would be the first people to jump into a war. They will jump into a war. And maybe a lot of them won't because of different reasons, or because they may like. There's always reasons, and maybe they wouldn't do it. But like, draft comes and they're in a Tea Party, they're gonna not resist that draft. They'll come back, wanting to, they'll come back, more zealous than ever, probably.
Actually,
You
you
know,
know what? I think you might be right about that. I think that if Trump went, just for the sake of argument, Trump went to the religious right and said, uh, we need to have our own jihad against the Muslims coming here taking our jobs or whatever, I think that they would fall for that.
yeah, yeah, and people don't. The thing about Americans, the problem with America is that America means different things to different people. To me, it means evil, straight up evil. That when I hear the word America, all I think is evil. Um, to a lot of people, it means constitutionalism, but constitutional itself is hard to define. Actually, in fact, it's harder to define than right-wing libertarianism because constitutionalism is at its base a drive for liberty and autonomy and free speech. That is what it is, but that's not what the Constitution was written for. First of all, it's a plagiarization from the Iroquois. Second of all, it was done to shut up the poor white people. And third of all, it defends property rights. And by that we mean private property. So constitutionalism itself is disconnected from the Constitution, what its actual aims are, why it was written. And when you unravel America, there's no such thing. Okay, Americans to the Cajuns and the Southerns is the Southern Belle. It's Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I don't know if you've read Walt Whitman. You should ask Caleb Maupin about that. He would probably know that. Walt Whitman's book Leaves of Grass. Okay, that to a lot of people that's what America means. If that's America, I suppose that's not so bad. But to other people, America is Plymouth Rock. If that's the case, then we're getting into Americanism, which is based on not reality at all. And that's some pretty sick, disturbing stuff. And and if you want to connect that to the United States Republic, that goes further with Manifest Destiny. Well, guess what? That's the pretext to Zionism, and that's the real reason why Americans are connected to Israel. Israel doesn't control America. Israel is very beneficial to America. It is the best stronghold, more than anything Turkey ever did for the United States, more than even Saudi Arabia. Israel is the perfect client state for the United States, and it's the only one that will support what America is doing unconditionally. And so that's why they can get away with more than any other client state. And the other reason is because they're connected to the telecommunications companies. The question is who let that happen. The United States let it happen. They have interests for such to happen. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can check up what Snowden said when he blew the West Zone. In fact, there was a magazine by The Wire where Snowden was interviewed, and one of the things that was most shocking to him is how the United States intelligence would just freely give whatever. Israel just had to ask, and they'll give it to them. Mossad just asks, and NSA and CIA, they'll give that stuff for free. The two reasons are because they can blackmail the politicians, that is Israeli corporations and Israeli bourgeoisie. They can do this because, number one, with the telecommunications companies that they're involved in, they can blackmail. But the other thing is that you may not even have to do that. Americans want to wash their hands and say, "Oh, well, Israel controls." No, no. What it is Americans are Israelis and Israelis are Americans. They're the same thing. The only difference is, and a lot of secular humanists in America would like to take Christianity away from America and say, well, the founding fathers, they were Freemasons, they were deists, and that's all true. So, but the average population was Puritan. It was a anti-Catholic sort of Protestant thing. This European colonial thing, pretty much, that wanted to believe that God was on their side. And Americans still need to believe that, because if this country falls to the secular humanists, I'd be very happy, because then it will fall apart. Because you can't claim Enlightenment values anymore. The way things have to be, because there is the proletariat consciousness, is it has to be socialism or nothing. And we were talking earlier about how in a new civil rights movement, we need to push the idea about third world rights, that the third world should be left alone. We should include that in a civil rights movement, which I believe we're in a new civil rights movement. I don't think it's a revolution. I think it's the civil rights movement. I think we should mention that. And I think that a draft would be difficult, because I think that anybody that tries to resist there's too many executive orders since Vietnam. About the Iran-Contra affair, for instance, and all of the North and stuff.
Yeah.
Rex 84. When people talk about FEMA camps, this is where conspiracy theorists really screw crap up. It's not FEMA camps. It's that they can use FEMA as a way of putting people in prisons because of Rex 84, which means Readiness Exercise 1984, which is a real thing. We know it exists. John Stockwell, a CIA whistleblower, talked about it. And this connects back to a rumor that black people believed in called the King Alfred Plan, and back then, Panthers believed that they had concentration camps ready for them. Or maybe not concentration camps, but internment camps or whatever. There's different types of camps. Bad enough where they're indefinitely detained in camps. With Barack Obama there, 2012, there was the National Defense Authorization Act that was passed. Chris Hedges sued the president for it. He won in court. And even though Hedges won, they overturned the fact that he won. Shows you how much Hedges' nonviolent stuff works. And with much respect to Chris Hedges, I fundamentally disagree with his opposition to Antifa and his rosy Martin Luther King nonviolent worldview. And I respect the guy, because he never sells out. But I think you have the same stance I have with Chris Hedges. Respect, deeply integrity, but you're wrong. But
I didn't know that he was anti-Antifa.
Yeah, well, see, because he doesn't believe that self-defense works. I hate to put it that way, and he would not like it if I said, if he was here and he heard me say that, like, I'd be fair to Chris Hedges in the debate, but I'd rather Dr. Weisfeld debate him, amongst us, because I think he'd be better at it. But I respect Hedges, but I think that Hedges is so married to nonviolence that he doesn't understand that that's not going to work. In fact, most people are going to be pacifists, not nonviolent, and he's not a pacifist. I will give him that credit. He really believes that you can't marginalize the white working class. And okay, I'm not saying that the white working class is all bad, but I am saying that it's mostly petty bourgeois. I live among them. I live like right next to them. They don't do anything. Therefore they want to give discounts to vets, but they don't want there to be universal health care. And they don't even union busting is a big thing in Arizona, for instance. It's like there's no real unions out here. And even if they did become socialist, they would need to stop thinking in colonial matters, and that's not going to happen. And then on top of it, the black community is divided into two camps. You have the revolutionaries, which there's more of them, and they're on the rise, to their credit. But the reactionaries among them are also on the rise and increasing. And the reactionaries themselves are brought into two camps. Rowdy disruptors who are involved in gang life, whatever. Some of them not even that bad, but they're just reactionary. You know what I mean? They're doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. And then you have the ones who want to impress white people, who become police officers and beat more black people than black people beat more black people than white people do just because they need to prove something uh, to their white masters, basically. Or they take these bourgeois jobs on, and that's neocolonialism here in the first world, which helps to destabilize the potential that actually is in revolutionary black people. Because if you want to know where the potential is in the United States, it is with black people. They are the ones that will do something. Because, all right, maybe in most places they'll have first world privilege, but they won't really have white privilege. Scottsdale's the best example, as I'm in Arizona. In Scottsdale, if a black person goes into a mall, they'll be followed until they leave. So they may use the same roads and first world privilege, but they won't have the white privilege. But see, with all that, you think about that, black people will be in so much trouble if they get drafted, because I'm sure you've heard about it. I mean, Democracy Now! Has reported on this before. White men will rape black women in the military. They'll rape them, and then nothing happens because a tribunal court will do nothing. Now, that may cause revolutionary potential. I can see that. But at the same time, it just might break somebody. You know, if you're broken, how are you going to be revolutionary? You know what I mean? It would be an experiment, to be sure, to see what would happen if we saw a draft. But there's just too many questions I'd have about that. Because, like, I've tried to describe a big thing here, but the Christian Zionists, they have the country. They run AIPAC. Jewish people don't run AIPAC. Evangelicals do. I don't care how much that offends Gilad Otzman and his fantasy world, but AIPAC is an evangelical lobby, which the people that run it just happen to be people from Jewish stock that don't give a crap about anything Jewish. So, like, that's the power in this country. You know, in the 60s and 70s, do you know how much Christian Zionism there was?
I imagine quite a lot.
No, it practically didn't exist.
Really?
Yeah, there were Christian Zionists, except that they didn't call themselves that. They called themselves by what they used to be known as restorationists. Restorationism is what became Christian Zionism. And the pretext to Zionism as a full colonial campaign really takes a letter out of Americanism. And Americanism like the word America can mean different things to different people, but generally today, especially since Trump, American refers to a fake continuity between Plymouth Rock and Manifest Destiny, where America is just and right and holy. And never mind that there were probably no turkeys, and that Thanksgiving they shot muskets to show how superior they were to the native indigenous. We're going to forget all that. We're going to say that they wore funny hats that they didn't wear, and that the natives and the pilgrims were besties. Absolute nonsense. I mean, this is fairy tale crap. The State of Israel does that shit too, though. Okay, the State of Israel, for instance, they celebrate the Masada, which was not a victory, it was a slaughter, where a bunch of Judean zealots decided they were going to fight the Romans, and they didn't do so with any strategy, they just went down fighting. Now, this is nothing compared to the partisans who took on the Nazis. They had a chance, they still didn't make it, but they had nothing else to do. They had no choice but to fight back against us. Ironically, most of them were Bundists and almost none of them were Zionists, and that is a fact. In fact, second only to the Bundists, you probably had a lot of Marxists and anarchists that were Jewish, that were part Jewish partisans. But it was called the Warsaw Uprising, and there were no Zionists involved. Now, the relevance to that is Zionism takes from Americanism. Within Americanism is connection to restorationism, which is something that came from Britain and England. And it's this belief about sticking the fictional Jewish race in the Holy Land and stuff. And in fact, that has a lot to do with what the integrity of the United States is. It was called the New Jerusalem. Mormons call Utah Zion. Are you seeing where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
By the way, the largest Christian sect in the United States is the Mormons, who back Israel unconditionally, without question. So I would say that it's just changed. It's not the 60s and 70s anymore. The Mormons were not this big. The Christian Zionism was still calling itself restorationism, and it was considered a fringe evangelical movement. In fact, they were known in the 60s as dominionists. Well, now they're just Christian Zionists. Big change. It's much different. I'll be very disappointed if you don't give me a really awesome rebuttal.
Well, no, I'm gonna have to kind of agree with you on that one. But I think we've gotten off topic.
Or
The question whether or not I think we've both got a pretty good arguments for our individual sides, but we would need some kind of for a lot of a lot of debates that go on. You already have a practical application of both ideas, and then you can judge based on results. But really, there's only practical experience on my side of it from the Vietnam War, which isn't really the same as it is today. So, I mean, I hate to be that guy, but we're going to have to agree to disagree until we have, something substantial to tip the idea in one of our favors.
right. Well, again, the one thing that I'll say to anybody listening, Christian Zionism. That's why I think it just wouldn't work. And when I say Christian Zionism, I don't just mean Christian Zionism. I mean toxic Americanism. I mean insane jingoism, which is at its all-time high. Yeah, we're war weary, but there's more of a desperateness to try to justify the American fictions than ever. Of course, I'm not saying you don't have an argument. I think you have a very strong argument, actually, because you are right. We would have to do some sort of experiment. How am I going to get you to vote for president and vote against? How are you going to run against me? How will we do that though? You're a Canadian.
Never stopped Obama.
Oh, I hated that. That was such nonsense. It became very hard to criticize his imperialist policies because the racists would just say, "Yeah, he wasn't even born here." I'm like, "No, actually, his birthday was mentioned in the newspaper in Hawaii, and I can prove it." I showed them the proof, and they say that I fabricated it from a printer. That's
Well, well, in the context of this debate, I mean, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree until we have some objective experience. So, would you be okay with that? We agree to disagree?
yeah. I guess we could agree to disagree. That's a first for Jason Unruh, though. I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping you'd like like I don't know. No, it's okay. This is very good. Hope we could do a follow up maybe. Like if I came up
Yeah.
with research. This is what you need to do though. You need to do research too, because I want classic Unruh to like totally whoop my ass. That would be so cool. Just that alone, because I would give as good as I'd get, or at least I'd try to until I won or lost.
Do you want to give anything before we end it? Like your organization or.
Oh, the Bundist movement. Well, I don't know how relevant that is to MRM, except that
Well, no, I mean, if you're
the
going to be here and do this, do you want to plug your organization or something?
yeah, okay, www.bundist-org. We've had a crisis recently, so we haven't been heard from a lot lately. We're working on reorganizing. Currently, due to that crisis, there is only the three members, the chairman, Dr. Weisfeld, which you did an interview, by the way. We were very happy that you took our information. He's the chairman, Dr. Weisfeld. Donna Newman, she's the emissary. I'm the cleric. I handle religious affair. I handle the public relations. I handle the religious affairs with a lot of different dichotomies of like how we respect religion. Also with other religions like the Muslims and the Catholics and Hindus and whatnot. But I also am the go-to guy currently, especially since the loss of the five council members. I'm currently the one that does the most outreach to the Marxist-Leninists, to the Maoist Third Worldists, to the anarchists. And that sort of thing. So I'm the guy you go to when you are trying to figure out where the conversation is with us. We've had a lot of progress, particularly with Marxist-Leninists, which is really good because anybody who knows their history knows that the Bund and Lenin did not get along. But a lot has changed, and we've adopted a lot of Lenin's ideas. But we still, of course, maintain national cultural autonomy, and we've had a lot of Maoists that have reconsidered national cultural autonomy. I mean, even you had mentioned a federated state in a Press TV interview, which was very interesting because that's something a lot of the current Maoists are speaking of. sadly, they're not going to be the Maoist people are used to, because if it's a Maoist that has a very strong presence on Reddit, I would question its authenticity. There's a lot of that crap. But we stand for the liberation of Palestine. We support Al Fatah. We support the Marxist-Leninists. I'm more familiar with the PLO. So what's the other one? They're a Marxist-Leninist group. The
PFP.
Yeah. So the people's. I have it somewhere here. I'm going to be.
Yeah, People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Yes. We definitely support them very much. I used to be critical of Hamas because of certain statements they made, but the fact is I do support Hamas for anti-imperialist reasons, number one, and number two, because they've become very refined and they've dropped their sectarianism, so they work with now the PLO, and that's good. And also, I have to give them a lot of credit for the humanitarian relief they've done because of how Gaza is, and Gaza is the world's biggest open-air prison, and since Trump and all his great wisdom with his decisions, regardless of what we think about it, now my children, me and my family and my children, we will all be blamed for a decision that the president made, because we just happen to belong to a culture of religion that's completely disconnected from the Zionist state. But that's kind of what it is we oppose the existence of the state of Israel. We promote a multicultural, more accurately, a multinational is more accurate. We promote a multinational federation, democratic federation. Our position with Syria is actually more not agreed upon, except that we do lean more towards a federated state as opposed to a nation state, because the nation state stuff doesn't work. In fact, we think that you could have avoided the Kurdish problem if it wasn't for the nationalism which was imposed upon the Middle East by the West, which is another argument we make, and this is one of the arguments we make against Marxism, is that we're not saying Marxism is wrong. In fact, in recent times, we see where Lenin was a genius. Our issue is that they didn't scrap the Hegelian dialect. In fact, we would say dialectical materialism would be much better if you scrapped Hegel. Get rid of Hegel. Not to mention Hegel was a metaphysicist, and that's all you should know. And it's ironic because both Stalin and Trotsky saw that. And if these guys were not the best of friends, but if they both solved the problem with Hegel, why do people even bother with Hegel anymore? But anyway, that's one of the things. We're against the nation state. We wouldn't want the state to exist for the most part because we think countries don't have to be states. But if there is going to be a state, get rid of the nation state, because when that happens, the dominant nation represses the other nations within that state, and you can't have class warfare if there's contradictions of nationality that could just simply coexist and have their own autonomous rights as nations. You do that, you could unite working class much easier. And that's one of the things that we share with the Marxists, and this is why we do like the Marxists, although we don't always agree. But we like the Marxists because the Marxists are about class division and about how to fight class division and struggle in class warfare. That's what we share with them. The difference is we think that national thing is going to be part of that, and away from nationalism. So that's what we do.
Okay, so we'll leave it at there. Guys, if you have any other additional ideas or thoughts on it, please leave them in the description, and thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.